Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Planetary Q&A. We have an incredibly powerful and impactful panel with us today. The way we're going to work is we have two volunteers out in the audience. If you could raise your hands. All right. If you raise your hand, they'll bring you a microphone that you can ask your question to, and you can direct your question to whoever you'd like on the panel. Thank you. All right. So just raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll come to you. All right.
Is this on? What would you say is the biggest single threat through climate change to our health?
What is the biggest climate change?
Single threat.
Climate change.
Who would like to take that? One of you young people want to have a go? Okay, great. Go for it.
Is this all right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question, but the thing with climate change, really, from what my perspective is, it's really difficult to identify one single threat. I think the most important, in quote, threat to each person from climate change would depend really on your location. For example, for someone like myself from a tropical country in sub-Saharan Africa, I would say that the singular most important threat is the increased exposures to insect vectors and the chances of infectious diseases. For example, prior to this particular summit, I had malaria and I was in the hospital for close to 8 days because of that. I probably even, at a point, I thought I was not going to make it here. I was discharged from the hospital the night before my flight. So that's, for me, that could be the singular most important threat. But for someone in Europe, for example, that wouldn't be it. So I think it really depends. For someone in a low-lying country or in an island, it could be the threat of natural disasters, which we don't have from where I'm coming from. So it really depends on where you are to answer that question. Thank you.
Can I just add to? Yeah. And I think one of the big threats is the fumes of fossil fuel and the choking of cities, the pollution of water and air, and so many deaths and children suffering from asthma. Even here in London, there are a lot of complaints about the air quality because of fossil fuel. So when we get rid of fossil fuel, which we will do at the latest by 2050, remember, stake in the ground, at the latest by 2050, then we will have a much healthier, safer, cleaner, and hopefully fairer, more equal world. But certainly from a health point of view, the gain will be enormous.
I thought I'd add a word too. Frankly, I think that one of the greatest threats is inaction. Is the fact that if we don't get our act together collectively and individually, we're cooked, literally. And that's where I think every single one of you comes into the equation. You have to speak up, you have to act, you have to certainly take inspiration from the 6 young people who have taken action and continue to do so, because if we don't start working in a collective way like we've never done before, if we don't energize millions of people, particularly the young people, to actually take individual responsibility for making sure that our planet stays a place where our children and their children can live, then all the rest doesn't matter because we won't be around to enjoy it.
I also think that probably one of the threat, it could be poverty, because when you think about it, like, maybe people that may don't have enough money to buy the organic things, and then of course they go for the cheaper thing in case for the plastic. So I think poverty is one of the biggest threat as well.
I agree with Jimmy on how the threats from climate change depend on where you're from. So in Palau, I would say the biggest threat would be food security. Because of rising sea levels, our crops are dying, and with changes in our ocean currents and with ocean acidification, our coral reefs are bleaching, and it's harder to find fish and other seafood to eat. And I know in the islands, food is also a big part of culture. And so when your food security is at risk, I think that also largely affects the culture of the island as well. So I would say food security is the biggest threat.
Okay, let me just sum it up. Just like they said, it's all encompassing. You can't just point a risk. Jimmy mentioned infectious diseases, but we also have chronic diseases such as cancer. Sometimes it's all about a long-term effect. An emission that is happening today may cause carbon monoxide poisoning. You may not see the effect today, but years to come, it must have altered some body cells that will result to risk to cancer and all that. Then we'll talk about our wildlife. For myself that live in the southern region of Nigeria, where there is oil spillage, our wildlife is being threatened, especially our aquatic life. Our mangrove forests and vegetation is being threatened. She talked about food security. Our plants are also threatened. So it's all encompassing. Thank you.
Any questions? If you could also just stand up and introduce yourself when you ask the question. Right over here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steven. I'm a UN Youth Delegate for my country, Albania. This year we saw something fantastic during the General Assembly of the United Nations. It was the first Youth Climate Summit, which, I mean, is a great achievement. And I would like to discuss with you, to ask you, how do you think we can bring this engagement and inclusion to another level within the government and the UN or other relevant entities? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I was at the Youth Summit. It was incredible to come into this trustee chamber, which is the most boring place in the UN usually. And it was as lively, it was like one young world. And I sat and listened for quite a long time to the young people who were talking, and then I was on a panel responding. And the kind of question you asked was raised as to how to now deepen this. And I can only give you one example, but I'm glad to give it for my own country. There's a lively discussion about having a youth council in Ireland like the Youth Summit. You know, we actually have a youth parliament, but they're thinking of something more engaging of youth in what they're doing themselves. You know, like the Youth Summit was. You know, what are young people doing? How can we encourage them? How can we support them and amplify what they're doing? So it was really. You know, I think it probably means that in future, thankfully, at climate summits and at all other discussions, the COPs, that youth's voice will be heard far, far more, which I very much welcome.
I want to. Okay. I want to add an example in Laos after the climate youth summit in the UN. I think it's really inspiring, and also especially for the context of Laos, my country, where people under 25 made up to 60% of the total population. So what happened in New York really make people in Laos think about their actions, like how they can do as an individual. And what we are doing here at One Young World, also, you know, people at my home are waiting to see all the live events from here. So I think those kind of activities can definitely inspire people at home, especially in developing country, when we still feel like unsure whether we as young people can do big things or not. But those kind of actions that doing by people like you, like yourself, it's really reconfirm and reassure that, you know what, you can also do it. So I think that's very important.
I was going to just flip it on its head, and I think sometimes the so-called macro conversation takes over when the truth is, when you break it down almost to the micro, it works better. Tomorrow, I think for the first time, you will, at this summit, see ambassadors in action. And it's always my favorite part of One Young World. Because the difference between One Young World and a lot of the summits I attend is that this is not a talk shop. The reason most of you are here is that you're already doing something. But like my fellow Kenyan here said, you need to go back to the very place you call home and start effecting change there. And I guess for Africa, and I can only speak for Kenya, it's the reason you're working in Nyamira, in Kisii. You're not trying to do it at a central government level, you're doing it county and regional. And the minute you do that, the groundswell works better because you don't have a hierarchy to deal with, which national government and big bodies bring along. So I think the challenge and the opportunity for One Young World delegates and ambassadors is always to remember, when you're effecting change at a community level, at a rural level, at a city, before you go to country and region and continent, it creates the ripple effect. And what for me has always been amazing at One Young World is when you see ambassadors in action. And I think that's going to happen tomorrow. Go on YouTube, look for them. Just to give you an example, Ilwad was, I think I met her in Johannesburg, and she was trying to work on something as simple as recognizing gender violence in Somalia. You can't even discuss the term in Somalia that many years ago. But because of the work she was doing with Sister Somalia, 5-6 years later, there's legislation. But it starts with acting at a micro level, and that in itself gets the attention that's needed.
Yeah. Me personally, I want to bring it not exactly going to the United Nations or to these politicians, because as I experience, I'm so sick with this kind of like, okay, we have a lot of this policy, etc. So, because like for example, in the Philippines, we've been lobbying for the plastic-free Philippines for how many years, passing a lot of bills and a lot of recommendation from the UN, but the thing it's nothing happened. So with that frustration, so I started a company. So within that company, so with the micro, I really love that label. I really love what you're saying, because like for example, for almost 5 years, I'm doing in making policy, recommending to the United Nations, etc. But nothing happened. But it's a very slow. So what we're doing, we reverse. Okay. So what we're doing now is on how what we are doing, on how we can make it, okay, that it will reach the people, the community. Because I think the power of the people is the most powerful that we can do. The powerful weapon that we have if in case we are going to demand, okay, to the government, meaning they don't have a choice. So like now, we don't have any policy in the government about single-use plastic, but still we're able to convince those big companies like Marriott Hotel to go reusables. Like whatever single-use, like even it's edible, even paper, so they already eliminated, but we're able to convince them. It's because their client demanding, the people demanding that you need to go for reusable, no more for, not anymore for disposables or single-used.
So we need to wrap up a little early, so we have time for one more question. Right over here.
Hello everyone, my name is Arya. I just turned 19, and some of my work includes acting as a youth advisor to the largest youth empowerment program in the UK known as NCS, and also as a youth consultant to other organizations. So I often come across individuals older than myself. Many of the issues One Young World looks into are intergenerational, especially climate change. So my question is, using all of your diverse experiences, how can organizations and bodies alike that traditionally have more influence of old than young, who, as we have seen in the past, do care so much about climate change, best work together to tackle this issue, to bring about the world that we all want to see?
I think I'm being encouraged to start this conversation because I'm chair of the elders that was brought together by Nelson Mandela. And when he brought us together in 2007, he was very keen that we would reach out to and link with young people. And actually, everywhere we go, the elders make a point of meeting with young people in whatever country and having that conversation. And I think you're right. It's an intergenerational conversation. So both sides have a lot to learn. And I mean, even, you know, I'm very involved in promoting the idea of climate justice, the injustice of climate change. And when I was talking about the injustice of climate change, I would talk about small island states like Palau, indigenous peoples, poor countries like Africa. And, you know, the people I was talking to, if it was in Europe or the United States, would sort of say, ah, yeah, but somehow that's not me. You know, it didn't work. And then I would also, usually towards the end, maybe say, as a kind of anecdotal thing, but also I'm a grandmother. I have 6 grandchildren. The eldest is 15, the youngest is 2. They'll be in their 30s and 40s in 2050. And they'll share the world with many more people. And I worry, because we're not doing enough. We're not doing what we should be doing. But now we're getting that directly from school children. Fridays for Future. I was in the UN when Greta Thunberg made that incredible speech. And you remember what she said, you know, and you're just continuing with business as usual. And she said, how dare you? And in many, many ways, what she's doing is speaking for a generation which is right to be angry about the fact that we are not doing what we should be doing. And we're still not doing it. Climate change is worse than we think. It's getting worse more quickly, and we're not doing enough. But there are many things we can do, but we're not doing them. We absolutely need this intergenerational discussion because young people are more affected. It's more your future, your now and your future. And we have not met our responsibilities, and we need the pressure of young people. I love the Fridays for Future, the young people, even the disruptions, Extinction Rebellion and other disruptions that are taking place, like shareholders standing up at meetings of corporations, litigation, or in particular investors saying, don't invest anymore in, so, you know, I think this intergenerational conversation is really vital, and I think One Young World can promote much more of it, and I can't say how happy I am that we have this context of One Young World to have more conversation.
All right, thank you very much. Just towing in the line of what Mrs. Robinson has mentioned. So basically, I believe the Youth Climate Summit itself is a step in the right direction because, like she has said, that is having intergenerational dialogue. Yes, the action, of course, is going to come mostly from young people like myself. However, the reality of the situation is the actual power to do something at a large scale or to empower young people who are doing what they want to do still lies with the older generation. So having such intergenerational dialogues would bring the older generation together with the youth, and we can then say, okay, this is what we want to do, but this is what we need. This is what we need in terms of resources, in terms of expertise, and you have the power to give us what we need. So that's another way that we can work together as youth and members of the older generation to achieve what we want to do.
Coupled with that, I just want to make a small addition to this discussion about intergenerational discussions. I also believe in mentorship. So as much as we talk about dialogue, we also need to understand as young people that we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn from leaders who've gone before us. And so the reality is that the future that we desire as leaders depends on how we relate with the leaders who exist today. Part of conservation's work involves a lot of mentorship. We are where we are because I spoke to professors who decided to be the lead experts in the projects that we work on. And without them, I wouldn't make mistakes and I wouldn't repeat what's already been done. So we need to respect the space for mentorship and learning so that we grow and
not repeat the mistakes that have been before, but instead learn and find solutions together.
I'd like to challenge One Young World. 10 years of One Young World and you still don't know how powerful you are. Let me put this in context. I launched a lipstick line in Kenya about, 7 months ago? Big is no good if big doesn't do good. And if you turned around and told me you wouldn't buy my lipstick because I had cellophane on it, I would have to change. I don't have a choice. And if you took that battle to any major corporation, you have no idea how big your spending dollars are. And I wish you knew how powerful you are. It doesn't need government. It needs you to say, I don't buy that because you don't care about this planet. It's as simple as that. Big is no good if it doesn't do good. It doesn't matter whether that's Google, whether that is Apple. And if you begin to ask that, and if you begin to insist there'll be nothing for us without us, there will be change, without a doubt. Push back. You have the power. Push back.
Thank you all so very much. I think that will be all for today. Thank you to our amazing panel. All right.